All right. We're so excited to be here. I do not see the show yet there, Ian.
Oh, really? It shows it on my end.
Got to love all the technical difficulties that we're having these days, giving all these talks. But just to start out, while Ian's figuring this out, my name is Tyler Lyson, and I'm one of the scientists at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And along with my colleague here, Dr. Ian Miller, we made this really exciting discovery in the city of Colorado Springs and within the city limits. And we are going to tell you about this amazing fossil discovery.
Is that working?
It is, but the screen is messed up. Let me try mine.
Okay, weird.
We are struggling today, but bear with us. It will definitely be worth it.
Thank you, Tyler, for that introduction. It's wonderful to be here. Oh, that looks pretty good on my end.
Okay, let's go with it.
Okay. So my name is Ian Miller. I'm Tyler's co-conspirator, if you will, on all of this work. And we're excited to tell you about this story that has unfolded over the last couple of years in just outside of Colorado Springs. And hopefully you've heard a little bit about it, but we're going to give you some more background, share some of the discoveries, and then, of course, open it up to questions to see what you guys want to know about it. All right, let's kick this off, Tyler.
I will not advance.
Yeah.
God. This is unreal.
It's got to be. Yeah, I was. Once I got into StreamYard, it just stopped. It stopped going.
We have exactly. Okay. How's that?
All I see is you. Oh, it's loading. Okay, there we go.
Okay,
so
we're going.
So here's our first slide. So despite our somewhat challenged beginning here, the reason we show this slide and what I want to talk you through a little bit is to give some perspective on why this discovery is such a huge deal and why Tyler and I not only are super excited about it, but the community, the scientific community, is thrilled about it as well. So if you look back in Earth's history over the last sort of 600 or so million years, Tyler's got his mouse there. There's 0 on the right, 600 million years on the left. And what you're looking at is the number of families of animals over time. And the color coding relates to some binning that we do. There's these different sort of major bins of families and different ages of life that kind of come and go. But as you move from the left to the right, you can see that pattern typically just goes up, right? So it's kind of going up there, kind of plateaus, and then it goes up again. And the deal is that what you're looking at is the diversification of life over the last 600 million years. But importantly, on this graph, anytime you see a sawtooth, some sort of jagged tooth going down, is one of the great mass extinction events in Earth's history. That's a drop in the diversity of life as measured at the family level. And there are 5 of these over Earth's history, or over the history of multicellular life at least. The most recent of which, all the way over there on the right, is the end Cretaceous, the end of the time of the dinosaurs, which heralded the age of the mammals. All right. So what I want you to, how we really want you to think about an extinction is something like this. So there's life in the millions of years leading up to the extinction there on the left, the pre-extinction life. And that branching pattern is, you can think of it as sort of a branching pattern of diversity. Think of it as just the branches of even a tree, right? You've probably heard the term, the tree of life. And each branch is a different group of animals, maybe even an individual species or something like that. But it could also be a way of life. You can make a branching pattern on any number of ideas. And then there's an extinction, that red line. And that red line, whatever that extinction, however it's caused, trims that tree. Many, many, many things go extinct. And yet a few, of course, make it through because, of course, there's still plenty of life on Earth today. But you can see those few branches that make it through into the blue area, into the post-extinction area, and then they themselves radiate. So extinctions are a filter on life. They mean the end to many ways of life, many species, many families, but it's also a moment of origins. It's the beginning of a whole new period of time. So when you look at the modern world today, we have this vast diversity. This is just a slice of that to help you understand that and to remember that diversity that's outside your window right now. Birds and plants, insects, incredibly diverse, more than 50 million species, something like that. The fishes, the reptiles, the mammals, the fungi. And yet everything that's alive on the planet today had to have an ancestor that made it through the last great mass extinction on Earth. So just think about that for a minute. So everything that you see outside and everything that you know about is living on the planet today has an ancestor that made it through the extinction and then diversified into this modern flora and fauna that we see today. So what happened? What happened 66 million years ago that was this great moment of extinction, or a filter, if you will, and then a moment of origins slightly thereafter? So we were hit by an asteroid. This is the idea. There's a couple of competing theories, but the leading one is that we were hit by this giant rock in Mexico. It was moving. It came in from the south, we think, moving at about 150,000 miles an hour, and it hit Mexico in the area now known as the Yucatan Peninsula, and it blew a hole in the ground almost 20 miles deep and about 150 miles across. And in that moment, it sent a shockwave and firestorm from Mexico to Alaska in 5 minutes. So here's a scene. This one's actually of New Mexico, but you can certainly imagine it. It's going to be the same here in Colorado. Two iconic dinosaurs at the very end of their time. Triceratops, the three-horned dinosaur there on the left, and of course T-Rex fighting it. And I always find this image a little bit funny because, of course, they're still fighting even though there's a giant fireball and shockwave coming at them. And if you were in the path of this shockwave, you would have been obliterated, absolutely obliterated. And so that was the first effect of the impact. And yet it had a whole series of effects that led to extinction, maybe the most intense of which was a day or so after the impact. You survived the beginning, the shockwave, the firestorm, all this, the earthquakes, tsunamis, all kinds of stuff. A day later, the stuff that was blasted out of the crater came raining back to Earth and superheated the atmosphere to about the temperature it takes to bake cookies in your oven, so about 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you were out on the landscape, and it didn't matter where you were, right? If you were on the other side of the planet in New Zealand, you still were breathing air that was about 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And that lasted for a few hours, a day after the impact. And that, we think, may have been the real cause of extinction. And yet some things survive. We know this, obviously, because we're all here today. But this fun diagram, this fun picture right here, kind of highlights or sort of tips our hand towards what you probably know is true. The dinosaurs go extinct, and a number of groups of mammals made it through. Just a few, many, many, many groups of mammals, species, and genera and families all went extinct at the boundary, and yet a few made it through. So just to put a finer point on this is actually Tyler's backyard in North Dakota. And this is an image from a show that he was in a number of years ago now, where the Badlands, which have the dinosaur fossils pouring out of them. This is one of the greatest dinosaur hunting places in the world. And you can see our teams there digging around. And then you see one person standing up at the top of the hill at a line. And that line marks the boundary. And so marks the point at which this asteroid hit. And so in the millions of years before the extinction, you see those ghostly figures of all the different kinds of dinosaurs. We find their bones pouring out of the hills, and yet above that boundary, we have never found an articulated dinosaur. We have never found a dinosaur above that boundary. And in fact, we have very, very, very few fossils from that slice of time. Next slide. So Tyler and I were very keen on adding some information to this problem. And the problem really boils down to this. There was a major extinction 66 million years ago. We knew a lot beforehand. The extinction happened, and there were precious few fossils afterwards. And in fact, the time afterwards, we sort of view as shrouded in mystery. And yet so much was happening, right? So if you want to know what the origins of today's world, you want to look right after the last mass extinction. And so Tyler and I searched the world over, rolled out the maps, and we're looking basically where we could collaborate and make a big discovery and add some information to this story. And usually you think you've got to go to some other part of the planet. You go to some desert, go to Mongolia, go to Bolivia, something like that, where people haven't looked enough to find this discovery. And yet there are rocks of this age here in Colorado, but people have been looking for a very, very long time. And so we revisited some of those sites, and this one right here, the beautiful Corral Bluffs, just outside of Colorado Springs, we visited this site together for the first time about 4 years ago. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to Tyler to sort of pick up the story and talk a little bit about Corral Bluffs.
All right, well, great. Thanks for all that, Ian. Yeah, just to reiterate, I mean, this was such a wide open interval of time. That moment right after the extinction of the dinosaurs. People have been studying the extinction event and what killed the dinosaurs for a really long time. We knew a lot about that, but we knew virtually nothing about what happened afterwards. And that's really unfortunate because that, like Ian has said, that is the origin of the modern world. Our own origins can be traced all the way back to that moment in time. But it was very frustrating for us paleontologists because we would go out to areas like this from right after the extinction, the moment of extinction, and we just would not find very many fossils. But we thought, like Ian said, we really wanted to make a discovery from this interval of time. So we went to Corral Bluffs. Corral Bluffs is not a new area. People have known about fossils from Corral Bluffs since at least the early 1900s. So here's just a picture of Corral Bluffs from a paper by Roland Brown, who was part of the Smithsonian. So they had an expedition out west. They found fossils at Corral Bluffs, but the area was a little bit, they thought probably too small, and the fossils weren't that well preserved. So they went elsewhere. They kept on going south, and they went into to make big discoveries in New Mexico. So people have kind of worked Corral Bluffs off and on, for the last 100 years. And so Ian and I thought, well, this is, it's only an hour and a half away. Let's go out there and see what we can find. And because it's such an important moment in our Earth's history, our own history. And we went out there and, we were looking for bone. We're looking for bones like this. So here in my hand was an amazing find for me at this interval of time. What you can see here are two little mammal jaws, teeth sticking up here and teeth sticking up right here. This just shows how fragmentary the fossil record is from this interval of time, because this is a big discovery. And you might look at it and be like, wow, that doesn't look like much. And you're definitely right. But we were really excited to find these few fragmentary jaws. But we were walking around out there. We thought, God, there have to be more and better fossils from this interval of time preserved somewhere in the world. And we thought, well, why not here in Corral Bluffs? And I thought, I started thinking about some of my fossil finding experiences in South Africa. And there they look for fossils, not by looking for bone like this and with teeth sticking out, but rather by searching for what are called concretions. And concretions are just a type of rock. And here's a video of a concretion. It's just a type of rock that forms around an organic nucleus. And if you're really, really lucky, that organic nucleus can be a whole mammal skull, like it is right here. So think of like a pearl in an oyster shell. And so we thought, like, well, maybe these fossils are inside of these concretions. And I remember it was in 2016. It was September of 2016. I picked up one of these concretions. I cracked it open with my rock hammer, and there staring back at me was a complete mammal skull. It was a moment that I think Ian will never forget, because within minutes, Ian came over and was looking at it, and then he started looking for the same type of concretion. We actually looked across the landscape, and we could see concretions just littered across the ground in this area. And we went around and gently opened them up, and within a matter of 30 minutes, we'd found several complete mammal skulls. Now, just think about that picture of the tiny little mammal jaws from the previous slide. That was the best find I'd ever had in over 25 years of looking for fossils from this interval of time. And just like that, we'd figured out how to find fossils from this interval of time. So here are some more of these concretions. You can look at them and you think, God, they just don't look like much. But after preparation, the cleaning of the fossils, we slowly revealed this whole ecosystem that was trapped inside of these ugly looking concretions, whole mammal skulls, whole crocodile skulls, entire turtle shells locked inside of these concretions. And here's this one photo of a small subset of the fossils that we've collected at Corral Bluffs over the past 3 years. And in every single case here, we have something that's either brand new to science. We have new species of turtle, new species of crocodilians, and new species of mammals, or we have the most complete fossil of a known taxon, of a known species. So this is a huge step forward of our understanding of this critical interval of time. With that, I'll turn it back over to Ian. Ian.
Okay, sorry, I was muted there. One of the things that's remarkable about science these days is that you really don't do it in a bubble. And I think for all the kids out there watching, it's really important to know that scientists work together, and you bring lots of scientists to the table because they each have their own expertise. And so this discovery, there are so many incredible facets to this discovery that we've just described that we really needed to pull a team together to study the fossils that we had found to pull the entire story together. And so this is just a small part of the team here. There's probably close to 50 scientists around the world working with us on this now because the discovery is that significant. So I just want to show you a couple of the other tools that we use in the kind of different parts of the discovery alongside the vertebrates. So my specialty is fossil plants, and we have 5 or so fossil plant experts working on this project now. And one thing that was remarkable about this is that often you only get half or part of the picture. Maybe you get some bones, but no plants. Maybe you get plants, but no bones. And yet we found both. And so on the left there, you see a beautiful photo of a bunch of different fossil leaves, some palms, some big ficus-like leaves. And those tell us a lot about what the environment was like. But that's the sort of macro level. We can also look at the micro level. And the pollen is also really important. And maybe you have fall allergies because you're breathing pollen, microscopic pollen, all the time. And if you turn the clock back at any point in Earth's history, the sediment, the mud, the sand is filled with fossil pollen. So we take a chunk of rock, we dissolve it, screen all the little pollen grains out, and then study them. And in this case, you can see on the bottom a Cretaceous forest with all kinds of shapes and forms. So each little red thing is a different kind of tree. And then right after the boundary, we call it the fern spike. The landscape was devastated, and you can see it all looks like the same stuff because it's all ferns with their spores. They're the first thing to come back. And then the Paleogene or the Paleocene, the time afterwards, you can see a whole new suite of forms, right? Compare that top panel to the bottom panel, different shapes. And so the pollen gives us another window into the forests of that time. Another cool technique that we're doing a lot of right now is peering inside the skulls. And so this is a major advance in paleontology over the last decade or so. And basically, in the 150 years prior to this, we could see the outside of the skull, but we couldn't see inside it. And so here's Tyler. He's actually at the Wheat Ridge Vet office late on a Friday night using the VET CT scan machine. And it's basically a machine that takes many hundreds or thousands of x-rays, and we're sending a fossil through that CT scanner. And that allows us to peer inside them to discover all kinds of things related to their brains, their noses, and even their ears. And yet we also prep things just mechanically. So this little specimen here, you can see us in a time lapse pulling the skull out with just more standard tools. So that's a tiny little Dremel pulling this fossil out of the rock. And this is a remarkable find. Again, remember we were just looking at jaws before, little chunks of the bottom jaw or the top jaw there. And here we are with a complete skull. And so here's just an example of peering inside that skull where we've taken the data and we've segmented out essentially aspects of the skull. And so you can see its head, even the ears up near the top, those little funny squirrely things. But this giving us a new window into fossils of this time period. We're going to let this video play here. You're getting what we call spinning skulls. But this again, we're peering into these things in a whole new way. So alongside that, there were a number of other really unusual discoveries. So one of the things that we were asking ourselves throughout this project was, and Tyler was really driving this. He wanted to know how the patterns in mammals were sort of, why should they be changing over time? We're seeing these changes, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about those changes here in a minute. But he wanted to know what could be driving these things. And one obvious thing that might be driving how mammals evolved after the extinction of the dinosaurs are the food sources. And so we knew from other places in the world that legumes are peas, and you probably may have even had some for dinner last night, but they're also soy and peanuts, and the list goes on. And in fact, there are more than 20,000 species of legumes today. They're the third most speciose group of plants on the planet, and they're second only to grains and cereals for us as humans in terms of a food source. And they're a remarkable food source for life on the planet today. And we knew from all kinds of inference that maybe there would be beans at about this time. They should be evolving at this time, but nobody had found a fossil. It was all inference. We were all sort of guessing or hypothesizing. And in fact, the earliest ones had been found in South America, a little bit younger than this. And so Tyler was asking, what would it take to find a bean in the field? And we're like, well, you really need to find the bean pod. You can't just find little leaves and that kind of stuff. You need to find the bean pod itself. And so we're going to show you a little bit later a clip from a documentary. And this is actually the film crew out at the site filming us. And we bring a group of teens with us usually every summer. And this is one of our teens. That's Aeon Way Smith. And Aeon was cracking rocks in a quarry right next to me. And I was doing some kind of interview for the film crew. And she just kept sort of pulling on my shirt. She's like, what's this? What's this? And I looked at it briefly, and I just sort of thought it was a stick. And we find sticks in the fossil record all the time. And she was like, no, look at this carefully. She'd been keenly listening to us and understood that maybe what she had found was important. And lo and behold, in the right light, it caught the right light, and I could tell it was a bean pod. And Aeon there on the left, in that moment, not only found the earliest record of fossil beans anywhere on the planet, but brought their origins from South America right to North America outside of Colorado Springs with literally the swing of her hammer. And it happened all on film. That never happens at all. So this is a long description of just trying to illustrate to you that discovery can happen anywhere, and it can happen certainly by anyone. This young scholar here, she was 14 at the time, found the earliest bean pod anywhere on Earth. And here's just some fun examples to show you. We now have many bean pods from these sites. You can see the little beans in the pods. Just think of snow peas with big beans in them. And on the right there are a couple of the little leaflets. Think of the locust trees that are all over neighborhoods here in Colorado. And they have the itty bitty tiny leaves that are all over the ground right now. And so this bean, this earliest bean, is not dissimilar to those locust trees that we see on the landscape today. And here's a fun reconstruction of what that would have looked like, the twisted pods and those little tiny leaves that are turning yellow right now, but the long twisted pods that may fall into your yard and start growing little bean plants themselves. But this is our best guess of what that earliest bean pod may have looked like. So before I hand it back over to Tyler, I wanted to sort of hit again on this point of the fact that we have not only the vertebrates, which was sort of the linchpin of this discovery. There just wasn't data like this before. And if the vertebrates had been found on their own, they would have been amazingly significant. And they would have generated their own discovery of some kind. But this site outside of Colorado Springs at Corral Bluffs is even more remarkable than that. Often at any fossil site anywhere in the world, you usually get one part or two parts of this trifecta of paleontology. You might get the plants and the ability to tell time from the rocks. You might get the vertebrates and the ability to tell time, but to get all three is essentially unheard of and is exciting anywhere we find it, let alone the period right after the time of the dinosaurs. And so this time aspect is really critical. How do we tell time from the rocks? And we can answer some questions around that at the end. But suffice it to say is that the rocks out there are very precisely dated now through the work of many of our colleagues. And so we can time exactly how the plants and animals are changing through the stack of rocks, essentially figuring out how evolution had played out in that period of time. So again, just to sort of put a finer point on it, if you had all three of these things at any point in Earth's history, we would be super excited. To have them all at this moment, right after the extinction of the dinosaurs, is unparalleled. Nobody had ever found anything like that before, and it allowed us to tease out all kinds of cool scientific stories. And so I'm going to hand it back to Tyler here, and he's going to take you through a few of the highlights of the discovery and what we were able to tell using this data set.
All right, well, thank you, Ian. I just love that story of Aeon's discovery of the oldest legumes. I think I just can't underscore that enough. I mean, a lot of times people think that these discoveries are made by scientists out in the field, but I mean, especially here in Colorado, if you just get outside and start looking around, you never know what you're going to find. And you know, she had very little training, and she was listening, and she found the oldest legume in that exact moment. And that was, I think, my favorite moment of this entire discovery story. And what a discovery it was. So what can we do with all of these data now? Well, we can tell how and when the ecosystem bounced back after Earth's last mass extinction. So this is what we knew before. We knew a giant asteroid struck Earth just over 66 million years ago, wiped out the age of the dinosaurs. And this is what we knew afterwards. Not a whole lot. But now we have all these amazing fossils. We have the plants, we have the vertebrates, we have the pollen, we have the ability to date the fossils. And that was the first thing that we did. We needed to figure out how old were the rocks in which our fossil localities were found. And we used a number of techniques. Like Ian said, we can talk about that later. But what we found is that we had the first 1 million years after the extinction of the dinosaurs. So we've given this the 0 point, this is the biologic reset button. And we have the first million years of the rise of the mammals and the origin of the modern world. The next thing that we can do, we had all these amazingly complete vertebrate skulls, these mammal skulls. Remember before, all we had were fragments of teeth, and if you were really lucky, you might get a jaw. Now we have the whole skulls. And so we can do a lot of things like with the whole skulls, like Ian showed with the CT data. We can peer inside and look at their ears and look at their brains. And that's all stuff that we're actively doing right now. But one of the easiest things we can do is look at body size. Body size is so important in all aspects of an animal's ecology. And so we just looked at the size of these animals to determine when did mammals get big. And we found this was with the pattern. So here is the body size of mammals up here. Down here in the Cretaceous, the largest mammals were about the size of a raccoon. The largest mammal that survived this mass extinction is about the size of a rat. And then you can see there's two big jumps in body size at 300,000 years and at 700,000 years. And these big jumps in body size, these are what were driving me and really pushing Ian, asking him, well, what's going on with the plants? Like, what is happening with the plant record? Maybe the plants are driving these big jumps in body size. And of course, so Ian went out with his team and found over 4,000 individual plants from many, many different localities from out of Corral Bluffs. We had a colleague who counted several 100,000 pollen grains to really characterize the forest from before the boundary, from right after the boundary, and then through that first 1 million years, which could really paint a picture of what the ecosystem was like. And what they found was that right after the boundary, there was an abundance of ferns. And so we've dubbed this the fern world. Then they found that within 300,000 years, there was a really patchy forest that was dominated by palm trees. So we dubbed this the palm world. And then right at 300,000 years, right when these mammals start to get really big, right when you have this first really big jump in body size, the forests start to bounce back. One of the main groups of plants that bounces back is the walnut family. So we've nicknamed this the pecan pie moment because pecans are part of the walnut family. And in this exact moment, the mammals got big. So maybe they were eating these pecan trees. And then lastly, right at 700,000 years, when the mammals get even much, much bigger, we get the appearance of the first bean pod, Aeon's bean or legume. And so, of course, legumes are really rich in protein. So we dub this the protein bar world because in that exact moment, when these bean pods appear, we see these much, much larger mammals that appear on the landscape. And then finally, from the plants, we are also able to infer temperature. And each of these important moments at 300,000 and 700,000 years after the mass extinction, there seemed to be a warming interval. And we think it's all sort of connected. We have the climate warming due to a number of natural processes. The warming of the earth is going to impact the forests. The forests, of course, are going to impact the early evolution of these mammals. So we had it all. It was sort of all connected: the climate, the evolution of the forest, and the evolution of these earliest mammals. And all of this allows us to paint these reconstructions of what the world may have looked like and how it changed. So if you go back 66.1 million years ago, right before the extinction of the dinosaurs, this is what Colorado would have looked like. You would have had a lot of feathered dinosaurs out on the landscape. You would have had T-Rex running around, lots of turtles and crocodiles. And then bam, at 66 million years ago, the single worst day for life on Earth. You have the giant asteroid that strikes Earth, wipes out the dinosaurs, plus 75% of life on Earth. A very, very bad day to be alive. But some things survive, and this is what Colorado Springs is telling us, is that this is what Colorado would have looked like. You would have had the Rocky Mountains starting to uplift in the background. You would have had a lot of ferns on the landscape. This is the fern world that would have lasted for several hundred years after the extinction of the dinosaurs. And here we have the largest mammal that survived the mass extinction. And it's about 0.5 kilogram. It's about, again, the size of a rat. That's the largest mammal that survives the mass extinction, next to the largest animal that survives the mass extinction. And that's this big soft-shell turtle called Exestomys. It's a several 100-pound soft-shell turtle related to modern-day soft-shell turtles. So pretty cool. And then at up to 300,000 years after the mass extinction, this is what the world would have looked like. You would have had these big palm trees, palm-dominated forests. And in the understory of these forests, the mammals started to come back. They started to come back both in terms of numbers and in terms of body size. So here you can see a mammal that appears on the landscape about 100,000 years after the mass extinction. That's about the size of a raccoon. It's the same size as before the mass extinction. So it comes back, they come back pretty quickly. And then we have that pecan pie moment. So here you can see these are the pecan leaves that Ian and his team found related to modern day walnuts. So the forests are starting to come back. One of the main groups that come back are these pecan trees. And in that exact moment, we get the appearance of these much larger mammals. Mammals that are about the size of a small pig. So this is about a 35-fold increase in body size compared to the mammals that survived the mass extinction. And then at 700,000 years, the forests continue to diversify. One of the main groups that appears are the legumes, Aeon's legume right here. You can see we have these various mammals eating the legumes. And at that exact moment, at 700,000 years after the mass extinction, with the appearance of these legumes, we get mammals that are much larger than they were ever before in mammalian evolutionary history. These mammals are well over 100 pounds. They are 100 times larger than the mammals that survived the mass extinction. We won't see a comparable increase in body size in mammals for another 35 million years. So all of this to say is that the ecosystem bounced back pretty quickly in geologic time. Of course, we're talking 100, 300, 700,000 years. Takes a while with, of course, when you're thinking about it in human years. But we were really excited to make this big discovery. We published this discovery in the scientific journal called Science. We were fortunate enough to work with filmmakers at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and then have this documentary come out on PBS Nova, which you can watch now. So if you haven't watched it, if you just go to the PBS website and Google Rise of the Mammals, you can watch that for free now. And then at the same time, we were also able to work with museum professionals at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, where both Ian and I work, to put together the story of this discovery. And here, right now at the museum, we have some of the best fossils found at Colorado Springs or Corral Bluffs on display at the museum. That you can now come and see for free with admission to the museum. So this was really a dream come true for myself and for Ian to publish a big scientific paper, to have a documentary come out the same week, and then to be able to open up this amazing exhibit at the museum. It was truly incredible. And so with that, I want to end by showing you sort of the highlight reel of this documentary. Just it really sort of tells this story of discovery quite nicely. So it's going to take a bit to do that, so hang tight. It's a really bad time for life on Earth.
I mean, you could go your entire career and not find a skull from this time period. That's how rare they are.
They're excruciatingly hard to find.
There's just nothing like picking up something and finding out it's something amazing.
It was crazy the way it happened.
Bam! We hit it big. I just found a mammal skull. It was like opening a door into a new world.
We want to build up a picture of how life evolved at this period.
Some things survive, right? Including some of our earliest ancestors.
over the last 66 million years. Mammals evolved in incredible diversity of forms.
That moment of rapid mammal evolution is effectively the trigger to our existence here on planet Earth.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for bearing with us there with our technological challenges. We're always very happy to share this remarkable discovery with everybody.
I think we have just shy of 10 minutes for a few questions, maybe about 8 minutes or so.
No questions. We answered it all. I love it.
That's awesome. Well, that's good. Yeah. So, is there anything else we'd like to share? I think maybe one point that we could just reiterate is that the science coming out of the Bluffs is going to certainly be an aspect of our careers, maybe the central aspect of our careers for decades to come. There's an amazing amount of data there, and the discoveries are just getting started. So we've told you this wonderful and incredible story of discovery, and yet undoubtedly more will happen from that period, not only from that period of time, but also from that spot on Earth. And it's just remarkable that it happened not only right here in Colorado, but right outside the city of Colorado Springs. What a remarkable thing. And so we're very thrilled to have it in our backyards. And I hope that all of you are thrilled to have it in your backyards as well.
Yeah, I would just end with encouraging everybody to go outside and try to make your own discoveries. I think that's always great. We live in such a wonderful state here in Colorado, and there's fossils and just cool geology everywhere. And then also, if you haven't, I'll put another plug for the PBS Nova documentaries. That if you haven't watched that, please go check it out. You can easily find it on the internet. And then if you're able to, come and visit the museum and check out the exhibit. Like I said, we have some of the best fossils from this remarkable discovery are on display right now at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. So thanks again for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. We'll see you, everybody.